It's time for our Buffalo Bills 2019 NFL Draft Retrospect. Now that we're 3 years removed, what did Brandon Beane accomplish? We're breaking it down today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino from the Draft Network, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. Happy Friday to you, and thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, or if you're joining us on the YouTube channel, your first watch every day. Today on the podcast, we are going to do our 2019 NFL Draft Retrospect as it relates to the Buffalo Bills. And if you are new to the podcast, welcome. If you've been listening since we got this thing started in 2019, you are aware that this is something that we do every offseason where once we're 3 years removed from an NFL draft, it's a fair time to look back and assess what the Buffalo Bills accomplished. So we're going to do that today. We are going to examine the scenario for the Bills entering the 2019 NFL draft, and then we're going to examine the picks, talk about the impact and what those players have turned out to be to give us an idea of how good of a job Brandon Beane did in the 2019 NFL Draft. Now, real quick, don't forget, next week on this podcast is Josh Allen week. I teased it at the end of yesterday's podcast. I'll tell you more about it today at the end of this podcast, but it's going to be a fun week. Stay tuned to the end to find out more about Josh Allen week. So let's get into it. Let's first examine the scenario for the Buffalo Bills entering the 2019 NFL Draft. This was Brandon Beane's second draft as the Bills general manager, and the team was coming off a 6-10 season with Josh Allen as a rookie quarterback. You guys remember year one with the Sean McDermott, Brandon Beane era. You know, they go 9-7, make the playoffs, which I don't think was part of the plan. They overachieved for sure. And it was definitely a plan that I think going into it, it was going to be a little bit more gradual in terms of the ascension that they got to. And so while going from 9-7 in the playoffs to 6-10 and not making the playoffs isn't necessarily the arc that you're looking for, it was part of the plan, right? The Bills were definitely resetting the roster and implementing literally an entire new infrastructure when it comes to the football operation, from the front office to the coaching to the roster. So they overachieved in 2017, but in 2018, it was probably about what we expected. They're coming off a 6-10 season with Josh Allen as a rookie. The 2018 Bills offensively were 30th in the NFL in yards and scoring. Remember that offense? It was terrible, especially at the beginning of the season. But the defense was fairly strong. It was number 2 in total defense and number 18 in scoring. In terms of off-season subtractions coming out of the 2018 season, the Bills lost Kyle Williams to retirement. Obviously a big loss there. And then the other notable subtractions were tight end Charles Clay, guard John Miller, offensive tackle Jordan Mills, and tight end Logan Thomas. This was an offseason in terms of additions where Brandon Beane was pretty aggressive, added a lot of veterans to the mix, especially on the offensive side of the football. And I think that was him understanding that he didn't do a good enough job in 2018 during Josh Allen's rookie season to give him a chance to have any level of success. So he goes out and adds several offensive linemen, including Spencer Long, Mitch Morse, John Feliciano, Ty Nsekhe, Quentin Spain, LaAdrian Waddle. It's a lot of influx of offensive line talent. At tight end, he added Tyler Kroft and Lee Smith. At wide receiver, John Brown, Cole Beasley, Andre Roberts. At running back, Frank Gore and TJ Yeldon. And then the notable addition to the defensive side of the football was Kevin Johnson. So this was a very deliberate, let's get a lot of veteran talent to surround our young quarterback and give him a chance. That's exactly what they did, a lot of veteran additions. So that's kind of where the Bills were at entering the draft in terms of new pieces, notable pieces that they lost. Offense was in a bad place. Defense, was pretty promising, number 2 in total defense. And they had quite a bit of draft capital entering the draft. 10 total picks entering the 2019 NFL draft. The Bills had a first-round pick, number 9 overall, their own second-round pick, their own third-round pick, 2 fourth-round picks. The reason they had an extra fourth-round pick was because Brandon Beane traded Reggie Ragland, linebacker, to the Chiefs for a fourth-round pick. They had 2 fifth-round picks, and the reason that the Bills had an extra fifth-round pick was due to Brandon Beane trading A.J. McCarron, a quarterback, to the Raiders for a fifth-round pick. The Bills had their own sixth-round pick and 2 seventh-round picks, and the reason they had an extra seventh-round pick was because Brandon Beane traded Kevon Seymour to the Panthers. And so I've hinted a few times recently about Brandon Beane trading players he's going to cut for draft capital, and that's kind of his compensatory pick formula. And this is a great example of it. The Bills had 3 additional picks in 2019 because they traded Reggie Ragland, A.J. McCarron, and Kevon Seymour. And I think we can all agree that those were not 3 meaningful losses for the team. But they got 3 draft picks in exchange. So, no, the Bills are not typically awarded compensatory picks, but they do a very good job of sending off players they're not going to keep and get draft capital in exchange for them. So the Bills entered this draft with 10 total picks. Now, they didn't make 10 picks because Brandon Beane moved around the board, but they had that flexibility because they were able to move on from some veterans and gain additional draft capital. BetOnline.net is your number 1 source for all your betting stats and sports information. Find all the latest sports developments, news, and odds, including this year's NBA Finals, the NHL playoffs, Major League Baseball, football's futures, and of course, all the latest fighting news from MMA and UFC to boxing. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sports wagering information, including live betting, esports, and more. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and the action. It's BetOnline, and it's where the game starts. So let's look at what picks were made and talk about where these players are at now that they've played 3 full seasons in the NFL, and for almost all of them are getting ready to play in their 4th season in the NFL. So that top 10 pick, number 9 overall, the Buffalo Bills selected Ed Oliver, a defensive tackle out of Houston. And as you know, Ed Oliver has been a starter for this team since he's been drafted and had plenty of flashy moments and really took a major step forward in 2021, right? He very much became the player the Bills picked or thought they were getting when they made him the number 9 pick in the draft. The Bills losing Kyle Williams right to retirement, and after an offseason full of investments on the offensive side of the football, the Bills used that first pick to get that penetration style 3 technique that Sean McDermott needed for his defense. And one of the things about Ed Oliver coming out of Houston was everybody knew how good of a player he was, right? A 5-star recruit, stayed local to Houston, was a big-time impact playmaker for that defense. But, he was undersized and played nose tackle in an odd front defense, right? It was always going to be a bit of a transition for Ed Oliver, not only because defensive tackles typically transition kind of slowly, not only because he is coming from Houston, a group, a mid-major program that's not facing top competition, but also because he was going to be asked to play a different position in the NFL, 3 technique. It's his natural position, but also something that was new to him. Getting a chance to be a penetration style 3 technique as opposed to a nose tackle, very, very different. And so that's one of the reasons why I think it took Ed Oliver a little bit of time for him to be a very consistent, disruptive presence for the Bills defense. Not to mention not having a stable 1 technique next to him, right? Starlo Tulele in and out of the lineup, missed an entire season, forced Ed to play out of position, and not necessarily having that guy that he can work with next to him. And we saw Ed really come into his own when he established that rapport with Harrison Phillips last year. So Ed Oliver playing this season, we're expecting another step. He's locked up on his 5th year option, and he looks like he's going to be a pillar of the organization for years to come. That's what the Bills got done with the number 9 pick in the draft by selecting Ed Oliver. An impact 3 technique, which is critical for this Sean McDermott even front defense. Now, there's not as good of a story to tell in the second round, where at number 38 overall, the Bills drafted Cody Ford, an offensive lineman from Oklahoma. And they moved up just a little bit to get him. They traded pick 148 to move up and draft Cody Ford. Now, Cody Ford was a starter as a rookie, right? Starter for a playoff team, started in the playoffs at right tackle, but he was very inconsistent. And he platooned with Ty Nsekhe at right tackle and had some injuries, right? Had offseason surgery, came into the next season and, bounces around between tackle and guard, has more injuries, comes back, winds up losing his starting job, and he's been a disappointment. He started a decent amount of games, but he hasn't been a consistent player. I don't think anybody's looking at Cody Ford and saying the Bills have an answer in terms of a starting caliber player in Cody Ford. Now, I think there's some reasons for that. Coming from Oklahoma, coming from a spread offense, 2-point stance, playing some guard, playing some tackle, not really getting himself established at any one position, not necessarily a great athlete, kind of a very average athlete, slow feet, has had his own personal struggles that he's opened up about. It's been a challenging road for Cody Ford. He's a gifted player. He just hasn't put it all together. And maybe that happens now, but it might be too late because I don't really see a path for him to being a starter for the Bills this year. I don't think that's even a possibility. Do I think he can take a step and grow under Aaron Kromer? Absolutely. But how are we going to have the evidence of that if he's not on the field? Well, he plays good in preseason. Okay, that's great, but it's different, right? We've seen really good preseason performances not translate to regular season. And that's assuming Cody Ford plays well in the preseason. So as a top 40 pick that the Bills moved up for, I don't think you're super satisfied with what Cody Ford has given to you. Let's move on to the third round, number 74 overall. The Bills drafted Devin Singletary, running back out of Florida Atlantic University. Smaller back, shifty back. Not super explosive, but a really, really productive player at FAU. And since he's been drafted, he's basically been the Bills' primary running back. Pretty sure he started every game over the last 2 seasons and started half of them as a rookie where he kind of split time with Frank Gore. But we're talking about a third-round pick that's been a starter for the Bills. Is he an impact starter? I wouldn't say so. But did he find some stability last year late in the season? Has he been pretty productive on a per-carry basis? Yes, absolutely. There's been a lot of good when it comes to Devin Singletary. He's a sufficient player. And so I think it's important for us to understand that he's been a sufficient productive player for the Bills, but also that he does have his own limitations. And that's why I think we're all very excited to see James Cook as part of this backfield. So he can help your offense, but you have to have a complementary player that's going to give you some of that speed and pass catching ability and a downhill player, right? Short yardage type player to make up for what you don't get in Devin Singletary. I don't think he's ever going to be a preferred lead back in the NFL, but I think he can be a 1B type player that you feel good about having. I appreciate that he's been durable for this football team. He's a perfectly reasonable player. And as a third-round pick to get a guy that's delivered what Devin Singletary has for the Bills, that's a really good job. I wouldn't call him a steal, but I think he's met expectations for a third-round running back. Now, the Bills weren't scheduled to pick again in the third round, but they did. They traded both of their fourth-round picks, 113 and 132, to get to 96 and select Dawson Knox, tight end out of Ole Miss. So they basically go from 113 to 96 at the expense of pick 132. And, I mean, Dawson Knox has been the Bills' starting tight end since he's been drafted. And that includes a rookie offseason where, you know, he was kind of banged up, right? I think he had a hamstring injury. You know, put him on the sideline for a decent amount of training camp that year. But whenever he was healthy, he was the Bills starter. He's basically been a 3-year starter for the Bills, who has grown every single season and had a breakout year last year. Was awesome last year. Led the NFL in, receiving touchdowns for a tight end. Led the NFL in passer rating when targeted among tight ends. Has really come into his own. And he was frustrating early on. But if you were aware of his skill set and his background, it should have been of no surprise to you that he was inconsistent early on and had a very high ceiling to develop into. You've heard me say this a billion times on this podcast. High school quarterback goes to Ole Miss to transition to tight end, and he plays in a Mickey Mouse offense under Phil Longo where there's just not enough on his plate. He didn't even score a touchdown in college. He was like the fifth option in that passing game. And so tight end's another slow developing position to the NFL. You have a raw player that's new to the position that really didn't get trained in college. But the upside was so good that the Bills started this guy right away and stuck with him, and they were rewarded for that last year with what Dawson Knox gave this offense. And I cannot wait to see him this year and how he stacks another good year on top of last season. And then we're going to start having conversations about what is it going to cost to keep this guy. So I think we can all agree that that was a great pick for the Bills. Number 96 overall, even though they had to trade a couple of fourth-round picks to make that happen. You know how our friends at Built are always coming out with new flavors? Well, this time Built has truly outdone themselves with the new Mud Pie flavor. And for the first time ever, Built is introducing the Mud Pie flavor in both Mud Pie Bar and Mud Pie Puff. Not sure what Mud Pie tastes like? Well, if you're a chocolate fan, you better sit down for this. The new Mud Pie Bar is rich whipped cream and chocolate mousse, smothered in 100% real chocolate and topped with cookies and cream crumble. I got a chance to try these things. Both the puff and the bar are phenomenal, especially if you love chocolate. It's got a great texture, a great taste. It is absolutely delicious. I would encourage you to try this as soon as possible, and you need to hurry because the Mud Pie Bar and the Mud Pie Puff are only available for a limited time. Visit Built.com to taste the deliciousness for yourself. And if you're not convinced, luckily we saved the best for last. It's actually good for you. All Built products are low calorie, high protein, and low sugar. You got to get them now. They're going fast. Go to Built.com. I have a deal for you. Use promo code LOCKED15. You'll get 15% off your next order. Again, that's promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com. So let's talk about the last 4 picks that the Bills made. They made 8 total picks. They entered the draft with 10 picks, came away with 8 players. We talked about the first 4. Now let's get into the last 4. In the 5th round, number 147 overall, the Bills drafted Vashawn Joseph, linebacker from Florida. And if you guys remember, back when this pick was made, I was very low on Vashawn Joseph. Very inconsistent player at Florida, where I really kind of struggled to see how he can claim a role for the Bills defense. And some of you guys didn't like that I said that, but I'm here to spike the football and tell you that I was right. Vashawn Joseph very quickly was off the Bills roster and never got another opportunity to play in the NFL. I think he had one workout, and I think it was with Washington, and then that was it. Never even on a practice squad or even on a 90-man roster for a chance to be part of a training camp roster. So you could just tell watching him play that there's just something off with this player. And he just didn't check enough boxes. I think that's what it comes down to, right? When you're scouting to me is always about risk assessment, and you want to have all these different things, and you have to understand how much of something you're getting and how much of something you're not getting, and then from there, understand what works in the NFL, and based on what you're getting in a player, you have to ask yourself, what is the risk? What is the likelihood that this is going to be a meaningful player? I never got there with Vashawn Joseph. And I have, trust me, plenty of whiffs and misses we could talk about all day long, but Vashawn Joseph wasn't one of them. And I know we're talking about a 5th round pick. It's not a huge opportunity cost here, but he didn't make any impact for the Bills, and he never really had a chance after he was very briefly on the Bills roster. Now, the rest of these picks are pretty good. Starting with the next one, round 5, pick 181, Jaquan Johnson, a safety out of Miami. I think Jaquan Johnson has delivered exactly what you're hoping to get with the number 181 pick in the draft. A depth player and a really, really good special teamer. I mean, a 4-phase special teamer in Jaquan Johnson. He hasn't had to play a lot at safety because the Bills have the best safeties in the NFL, but looked pretty good in his one start against Houston last year. Has been a really good preseason player. Now, he's got some limitations. He's not the biggest. He's small. He's not super athletic, but he's just kind of a football player. And that guy helps on special teams, and he provides depth in the secondary. And I think that's a really good pick at number 181. And then the Bills made 2 7th-round picks. Number 225, Darryl Johnson, defensive end from North Carolina A&T. Kind of a similar situation as Jaquan Johnson, where the Bills got a 4-phase special teams player, and then they were super deep at defensive end last year. They couldn't keep him, and then flipped him for a late-round pick with the Carolina Panthers. Now, he didn't really get a chance to do much for the Panthers last year, but we saw with Buffalo this guy be a core 4 special teams player, and even in some years played like 20% of the snaps on defense. For a 7th-round pick, 225 overall, you're taking that all day long. Then the last pick the Bills made, another 7th-rounder, pick 228 overall, Tommy Sweeney, tight end, Boston College. Has been kind of like the tight end 3 for the Bills over the last, well, I guess it's 3 seasons, but we know that he missed his 2nd season with that heart condition. But as a guy that's been rostered when healthy, has been your tight end 3, has a good chance to be the tight end 3 this year, 7th-round pick. All right. And I think Tommy Sweeney's one of those players where, maybe he doesn't make the biggest impact on the field, but you just kind of get the sense that as a locker room guy, he just really fits in, right? He's part of the culture. He's part of this environment that Sean McDermott has created where guys want to go out and bond with their teammates and connect and play for each other. And I think Tommy Sweeney is a big part of how that all comes together. You wish he made more of an impact on the field. He's just kind of a limited player that's not in the cards for him. But as a 7th-round pick, I think you can be pretty satisfied with the returns on Tommy Sweeney. So what does this all look like? Well, I think Ed Oliver is a hit. I think Cody Ford is a miss. I think Devin Singletary is a hit. Dawson Knox is a hit. Vashawn Joseph, a miss. Jaquan Johnson, a hit. Daryl Johnson, a hit. Tommy Sweeney, a hit. 8 picks, 6 hits, 2 misses, and the end result being an impact defensive tackle, starting running back, an impact tight end, 2 quality core special teamers, and a depth piece along the offensive line and at tight end. That's a good draft. Now, it's not 2018, but few drafts are ever going to be 2018. I mean, that was insane. Literally all of those players, I think, except for Austin Prohl, have become very meaningful players in the NFL, and in some cases, like impact starters. And a lot of them have re-signed in Buffalo. So 2018 is that draft that I think we're going to look at. I mean, 2017 was so good too. Deion Dawkins, Matt Milano, Trey White. You kidding me? Why are the Bills good? Well, look at what they got done in 2017, 2018, 2019 in the draft. Just stacking good classes, impact classes on top of each other. Now, you could sit here and get hung up on Cody Ford at pick number 38, not panning out. Look at the rest of this. It's an outstanding job. Like I said, next week on this podcast, it is Josh Allen week. The entire week is all about 17, Josh Allen. And for at least one of those shows, I want you to be part of it. Our Herd Mentality show next week will be Josh Allen takes comments and questions, and Josh Allen takes comments and questions only. So send them in. Joe@thedraftnetwork.com is my email. You can shoot me a DM on Twitter @thejoemarino. I want to hear from you on Josh Allen. Tell me about what Josh Allen has meant to you as this team's quarterback and how he's impacted your fandom. You can ask me hard questions about Josh Allen. You can give us a spicy hot take about Josh Allen. Share your favorite Josh Allen memory. Tell me your favorite throw. Tell us the moment where you knew Josh Allen was the guy. Tell me how you thought about Josh Allen when the Bills drafted him. Tell me what your favorite thing is about Josh Allen. And I want to have an entire show where I just share all of this and kind of talk through it. And we have a lot of other really good concepts throughout the week. It's all Josh Allen centric and probably going to be a bonus episode as well. So I'm fired up for next week. I hope you are. Josh Allen all week. I'll take it. I think that's a great way for us to really start this dead period, if you will, where we're not going away. We're 5 days a week. The Bills are on break until the end of July. We had a lot to talk to in this stretch, and I couldn't think of a better way to kick it off than dedicating an entire week on this podcast to talking about Josh Allen. So don't miss it. Make sure you're subscribed. Would love it if you took a second to rate, review, and share the podcast. Have a great weekend, and I look forward to catching up with you again next week for Josh Allen Week on the Locked On Bills podcast.